My work is all about narratives and stories, personal stories, historical-based stories, and imagined stories. I actually trained in museum studies and worked in museums for a long time, so that influence of working particularly with objects, but with stories about objects and historical memories and things is really influential. I think textiles are very universal. Almost all cultures have textiles. They've been around for thousands of years. We all have a very personal engagement with textiles. We have strong memories from childhood, from blankets or tablecloths that we remember at our grandparents. So they're kind of full of stories and associations already before I've even started working on them. And that's what I find so fascinating, particularly working with old textiles. Shopping and exploring for vintage and antique fabrics is probably my main hobby. I love doing it. I can spend hours rifling through heaps of scruffy things in car boot sales and junk shops. I'm more than a little bit obsessed with antique textiles, and it's the very old stuff that I tend to use. 19th century scraps I've got quite a large collection of, so that's dress fabrics but also table linens and things like that. I buy things that are past use for most people, that most people are not interested in because they're torn or they're stained or they're disintegrating, and I find those kind of fascinating in themselves because they've got pre-existing narrative or a story behind them. I get quite excited if I find something unusual or rare in a pile of what looks like really boring old tablecloths, and that's part of the fun for me of exploring. Obviously I don't know the story of most of the fabrics that I buy. They've lived, they've had a life, and something has happened and they've been part of somebody's life somewhere, and that is part of the work. So when that history in the textile then goes into the work, that becomes part of the narrative as well. I also like using personal textiles from family collections, so I've got a lot of textiles from my grandparents' house, which I've used in several pieces of work and will be using for years because there's an awful lot of it. That has a very personal story, which I really enjoy. I've been exploring hand embroidery a lot more in the last couple of years. I've done quite a lot of work where I've been exploring hand stitch and using that as part of the process as much as the finished work of actually the act of sitting and hand stitching something very slowly really kind of engages you with the work that's gone into making the cloth that you're using and the people that have come before have been stitchers and a whole broad history of embroidery and hand stitch. Although people always say you must be incredibly patient to do all that hand sewing, I'm not really. I'm just patient with sewing because I like it and it's an enjoyable activity, therefore I don't find it boring. The act of slowing down and working that slowly is kind of very grounding and meditative and engaging and absorbing. I've recently started working with natural dyes, and it really works to kind of bring another element of the narrative into my work, particularly when I'm creating work that's around a particular place or a particular time, because I like to use the plant materials that are available in a particular location. So I don't buy imported dye stuffs, I use fresh plant material from the local area. But I enjoy that kind of the foraging and the exploring and the investigating and sense of place and attachment to an area and getting to know even kind of like the patches of weeds around the corner from my house or from my studio that kind of roots me and grounds me. I think I'm interested in remembering through my work, remembering people who were special to me, but also exploring that universal idea of memory and how objects and textiles and things are used to kind of transmit memories and stories. Because I'm working a lot with my granddad's story and his garden tools, I'm working with stories about criminals, I'm working with emotionally upsetting stories that are, personal things to me. It takes away that sense of prettiness and floweriness of making the past all look nice and fluffy. I think as a historian I'm more aware of that. I don't have quite so much of the rose-tinted spectacles about the past and people's lives in the past. So I'll be continuing to play around with the ideas of memories and stories and narratives for a long time.